paradrama tales.
He said I was the reason his daughter cut herself. Not the depression, not the pressure she was under. Me, 1 sentence, 10 words. And just like that, I realized I wasn't in a relationship. I was standing in the middle of someone else's guilt, wearing it like a target. We got engaged on a Sunday morning. No grand gestures, just quiet, simple, intimate. He knelt by the kitchen table while the kettle was still boiling, and I said yes without hesitation. It wasn't about a ring or a post. It was about choosing each other. At least, that's what I thought. But the moment didn't last the way I'd imagined it would. There was no celebration, no calls to family, no clinking glasses or dancing around the living room. Because before I could even catch my breath, he said, "We shouldn't tell Allie yet." Allie, his daughter, 16, struggling, fragile. He said he needed time to figure out how to tell her. He didn't want to upset her, didn't want her to feel blindsided. And I understood that. I did. I knew she wasn't mine to shape or discipline or comfort. I wasn't trying to step in as a mother. I just thought, maybe I could be someone safe, someone consistent. So I waited. We agreed I wouldn't tell my friends right away, that I wouldn't post a picture of the ring, that I'd keep the engagement quiet, just for a little while, until he found the right moment to sit her down. That moment took over a month. 30-something days of smiling silently while other people posted their joy, of carefully cropping my hand out of pictures, of pretending to be just dating when people asked. I didn't realize how much it would wear on me, being engaged in theory, but invisible in practice. And it wasn't just about the pictures. It was the birthdays I couldn't toast at as a fiancé, the friends I had to lie to, the part of me that started whispering, if this is real, why does it need to be hidden? I kept reminding myself, it's for Allie. She's had a hard year. She's sensitive. She doesn't trust easily. He's trying to protect her. But somewhere in all that protecting, no one thought to protect me. I wasn't asking for fireworks, but I was hoping for dignity, for some small sliver of this milestone to feel like mine too. Instead, I was walking on eggshells in my own joy, afraid a smile might set off a storm I hadn't even caused. When he finally told her, it didn't go well. She got angry. She said she didn't support us. She said I was taking him away. And then, not long after, the cutting started again. Not because of us, not directly. It was something else, a different trigger at school. But still, the shadow lingered, and suddenly, every choice I'd made to be considerate, to stay quiet, to delay celebration, to put her emotional comfort first, it all meant nothing. Because when the time came, I still became part of the problem. I thought waiting would help her accept me, but all it did was teach me that silence doesn't protect love. It only isolates it. And when someone asks you to put yourself on pause for their family, you start to wonder, how long before you stop mattering altogether? I want to be clear about something. I never saw Allie as a villain. She's 16. She's hurting. Her world is changing in ways she can't control, and her father, her constant, is now choosing a life that doesn't orbit entirely around her. That's hard. I get it. When I was 16, I didn't know how to hold a heartbreak, let alone share a parent. So I tried to be patient with her resistance. I tried not to take it personally when she refused to make eye contact, when she slammed doors, when she said things like, "I'll never call you family." She wasn't being cruel. She was being afraid, and fear at that age wears a dozen different masks. But somewhere in the process of making room for her pain, I stopped noticing how much space it had taken. Because Allie's hurt wasn't just present, it was powerful. It dictated conversations. It set the tone of entire weekends. It determined whether I was allowed to come over or whether I needed to give them time. And most of all, it determined how much of my relationship with her father could exist out in the open. There were days I felt like a ghost in their house, welcome when it was convenient, invisible when it wasn't. My presence was always conditional, acceptable if she was in a good mood, unacceptable if she wasn't. And I said nothing. I swallowed it all. Because mental health is serious, because cutting is real, because I didn't want to be the adult who took a child's pain personally. But pain, when left unchecked, becomes something else. It becomes a currency. It becomes leverage. And slowly I watched this girl, who truly was struggling, realize that her struggle moved things, that her silence, her coldness, her refusal to approve, shaped the way her father responded to everything. He'd lower his voice around her, tiptoe in conversations, change plans to avoid triggering her. At first, it seemed like compassion. Then it started to feel like fear. And that fear extended to me. He was afraid I'd be too much, that I'd post something Allie wouldn't like, that I'd speak up about something and she'd retreat deeper into herself. So, I was constantly being asked to shrink, not by her directly, but by his attempts to manage her emotions through my behavior. I became the emotional buffer, the adjustment, the adult who always had to yield. And I did it willingly, until it wasn't a compromise anymore, until it felt like a pattern, until it felt like Allie's pain had quietly rewritten the terms of our engagement. I don't blame her for hurting. I blame the silence that let her hurt dictate everything. Because when we hand over that much control to someone who's still learning how to hold themselves together, we don't empower them. We trap them. And we trap everyone else with them. Allie never asked for that power, but she learned to use it, because no one ever told her, your feelings matter, but they can't be the only thing that does. And I waited for him to say it. He never did. So instead, I learned how to say nothing. And every time I stayed quiet, Allie's pain spoke louder. The argument wasn't even about Allie. It started over something small, dishes, errands, I honestly don't remember. Just one of those small domestic disagreements every couple has. But somewhere in the middle of the back and forth, something shifted in his voice. That edge came in, not volume. He rarely raises his voice, but sharpness. That tone that says, I've been holding this in. And then it came out like a pin slipping between ribs. I hope posting those pictures publicly was worth it, he said, eyes locked on mine. Because Allie stabbed herself after seeing them. For a second, the room didn't feel real. The space between us felt like glass. I didn't even react at first, just stared at him, blinking. I think my mind had to translate it twice, once as words and again as meaning. You're saying, I'm the reason she hurt herself? I asked quietly. He didn't flinch. Yes. No hesitation, no pause, just yes. And with that one word, something shattered. Because here's the thing, I've been blamed before. We all have, in little ways. Forgotten birthdays, misunderstood texts, hurt feelings we didn't mean to cause. That's part of being human. But this wasn't just blame. This was weaponized guilt. He took the darkest moment in his daughter's struggle, wrapped it around my neck, and pulled. And the part that hurt the most wasn't that he said it, it's that he meant it. That in that moment, he truly believed that my decision to share a photo of my engagement, the engagement I had delayed posting for weeks to accommodate his daughter's emotions, was what pushed her to self-harm. Not the pressure of school, not the anxiety she'd already been battling, not the vape incident that got her caught and humiliated at school. Just me and my ring, me and my smile, me daring to show joy that hadn't been pre-approved. That was the moment I realized this relationship wasn't a partnership. It was a balancing act. And every time something went wrong, with her, with life, with the weight of fatherhood, he reached for the one thing he knew would shift the balance. Blame me. Because it's easier to blame the woman beside you than face the pain inside your own home. Easier to tell yourself her happiness caused this than to ask why your daughter is still hurting after all this time. Easier to hold me accountable than to hold space for the fact that maybe, just maybe, you've created a world where no one's allowed to be okay if Allie isn't. I wanted to scream, not because he blamed me, but because part of me believed him for a second. That's how deep the conditioning runs. That's how fast you can lose yourself when love is entangled with someone else's guilt. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the man I thought I'd build a life with, and wondered how long I'd been holding up this entire house of glass, while everyone else got to throw stones. I sat with it, the guilt, the way it crept in quietly, curling around my spine like something familiar. Because it was familiar. I've carried guilt before, for being too loud, too emotional, too independent, too much. I knew the weight of it, how it settles without asking, how it convinces you it belongs there. After he said those words, because Allie stabbed herself after seeing the pictures, I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't even defend myself. I just felt heavy, like my joy had turned radioactive. And that's what guilt does, doesn't it? It rewrites history. It paints over your intentions with someone else's pain. It turns your "I didn't mean to" into "you should have known better." But here's what I've learned. Guilt isn't always a sign you did something wrong. Sometimes it's just residue from someone else's failure to take responsibility. And the truth is, Allie didn't harm herself because of me. She didn't pick up a sharp object because of a photo. She didn't fall apart because I smiled in a dress she didn't like. She hurt herself because she's hurting. Because she's a teenager with more emotion than tools. Because she got caught vaping at school and didn't know how to handle the fallout. Because mental health is a storm, and some days the wind wins. But it's easier, for him, maybe even for her, to attach that pain to something they can point at. A photo, a ring, a woman who wasn't supposed to be part of their story. And for a moment, I almost accepted it, almost wore it like a badge. The reason Ally relapsed. But then I remembered something I read once. You can't be the hero and the villain in the same story, just because someone else can't handle their discomfort. I wasn't her enemy, I was just the nearest exit for his frustration. And maybe he needed somewhere to put it. All the fear, the pressure, the helplessness of raising a daughter he couldn't always save. But just because he needed to put it down doesn't mean I had to carry it. So I sat there, and I looked at that guilt, and I said, not this time. This doesn't belong to me. This is not the weight I want to hold for the rest of my life. Because love built on guilt is not love. It's control. It's silence. It's resentment waiting to bloom. And I want something else. I want love that lifts, not one that leans until I collapse. So, I gave the guilt back, quietly, firmly, without apology. And in its place, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Not relief, not revenge, just clarity. There are silences that heal, and there are silences that rot. His was the second kind. After he blamed me, we didn't talk about it again. He left to get some space, and I didn't chase him. Not because I didn't care, but because for the first time, I wanted to see what he would do without me holding the conversation together. He didn't call, didn't check in, didn't say, "I'm sorry I said that." And in that quiet, I started hearing everything I'd been ignoring. For months, I had been navigating this relationship like a house guest in my own engagement, tiptoeing around emotions I didn't create, catering to a dynamic that wasn't mine, being careful not to make ripples in waters I hadn't disturbed. Because it was always about Allie. Every decision, every mood, every plan. If she was having a good week, we could breathe. If she wasn't, we froze. And I don't say that without compassion. I know what mental illness looks like. I know how much weight a father carries when his child is struggling to stay afloat. I've seen that kind of helplessness before. It's a grief that doesn't come with a funeral, a parent's quiet mourning for the version of their child that doesn't always show up. But what I hadn't realized until now was how often that grief had become my job to carry too. I wasn't the stepmother. I wasn't the therapist. I wasn't even the partner, not really. Not when his loyalty was already stretched to its limits and I was always the expendable piece. What I had become was a pressure valve. When Allie was hurting, he'd tighten. When I smiled too brightly, he'd flinch, always scanning her reaction first. When she cried, he folded. When I cried, he paused. And in that balance, I saw the truth. There was only room for one emotional priority in this house, and it wasn't me. Her scars spoke louder than my silence. Her sadness carried more weight than my joy. Her pain was the one truth he couldn't question, so anything that conflicted with it had to be wrong. Even me, especially me. And maybe that's what hurt the most, not just the blame, but the realization that my role in this relationship had never been solid. I wasn't a partner, I was a placeholder. I was someone to care for him while he cared for her. And love, when built on imbalance, starts to ask for too much. It asks you to wait quietly while others scream, to celebrate privately while others mourn, to give endlessly while being told now isn't the right time to receive. And eventually, you stop asking. You stop speaking, you sit in his silence and try to make it mean something kind, but all silence really means is this: he's not choosing you loudly enough for it to matter. So, I chose for him. I looked at my position, the one I'd tiptoed into so gently, so lovingly, and I stepped out of it. Because if he couldn't find his voice to defend me, then I'd use mine to walk away. We argue like most couples, or at least we used to. Nothing explosive, no screaming matches. Just quiet tension and measured tones, like two people pretending not to be hurt, so they don't make things worse. Most of the time, we found our way back. One would soften, the other would reach. But that night was different. It wasn't about Allie, not directly. It was about something small. Dinner plans, I think. One of those tiny annoyances that doesn't mean anything until it does. We were both tired, on edge. The kind of tired that makes kindness feel like a luxury you can't afford. And then he said it. I hope posting those pictures publicly was worth it, because Allie stabbed herself after seeing them. 12 words. That's all it took. He didn't shout. He didn't even look angry. He looked resigned, like he'd been waiting to say it, like the sentence had been sitting on his tongue, rehearsed, loaded, ready. And now it had landed. There are words that leave bruises. This one broke something, because it wasn't just cruel. It was calculated. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a weapon. A quiet, deliberate knife handed to me, hilt first, as if he expected me to turn it on myself. I remember standing there, staring at him, and realizing that this wasn't about a photo. It wasn't about Allie's pain. It wasn't even about me. It was about control. This was how he reminded me what my joy had cost him. How he made sure I knew who held the moral high ground in this house. How he kept me small, by tying my happiness to someone else's harm. And that's when I knew. Not hoped, not feared, knew. This relationship wasn't sustainable. Not because we didn't love each other, but because in his world, love came with terms, conditions, quiet rules that shifted depending on how fragile Allie felt. And now, the worst of those rules had been spoken out loud. If she hurts, it's your fault. If you shine, you're selfish. If you celebrate, you should feel ashamed. That sentence, I hope it was worth it, wasn't just blame. It was punishment. A declaration that I wasn't just unwelcome in his daughter's heart. I was unsafe in his. Because a man who truly believes the worst thing you did was smile on the internet isn't protecting his daughter. He's sacrificing you. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need an apology. I didn't need him to take it back. I just needed to remember it, word for word. So, when the time came to leave, I wouldn't forget who put the final crack in us. After he said it, that sentence I'll never forget, he didn't apologize. He didn't reach for me or try to soften the blow. He didn't say he didn't mean it, or that it came out wrong, or that his emotions got the better of him. He just left. He said he was going to see a friend, that he needed space. I nodded, quiet, calm, more numb than anything. But something in me froze, not from sadness, but from recognition. Because this wasn't the first time he'd done this. The disappearing, the silence, the sudden need for distance whenever things got too real, too raw, too inconvenient. Only now I saw it for what it really was. Not space, not reflection, not emotional maturity, escape. He wasn't walking away to process what he'd said. He was walking away so he wouldn't have to. Because if he stayed, he'd have to sit in the wreckage he created. He'd have to see the look in my eyes. He'd have to face the weight of what it means to say, "You caused a child to hurt herself," and still expect to come home to someone who would make dinner and pretend everything's okay. He wanted the freedom to drop the grenade and skip the cleanup. That's what space meant. It meant I would be the one left holding the silence. I would be the one sitting alone in the echo of a sentence that should never have been said. I would be the one who'd question herself, retrace every step, wonder if maybe he had a point. But not this time. Because I know what real space looks like. It's collaborative. It's honest. It comes with care. It sounds like, I need time, but I want us to come back to this. I know I hurt you, and I don't know what to say yet, but I'm still here. Please don't think. My silence means I don't care. But his space didn't come with any of that. His space was a vacuum, a hollowed-out place where accountability should have lived. A curtain pulled between us so I couldn't see the truth written on his face, that he didn't want to fix it. He wanted to avoid it. And maybe, in the past, I would have waited. I would have blamed myself for pushing him away. Tried to be softer next time. Tried to earn back the peace he took with him. But not now. Because when someone leaves you to sit in the wreckage they created, it's not about healing. It's about abandonment disguised as reflection. And I don't need space from a man who wounds and runs. I need more than that. I need a partner who can say the hard thing and still stay in the room. So, when he left that afternoon, I didn't wonder when he'd come back. I started wondering why I ever thought he was the kind of man who would. People like to say that love can survive anything. It's a nice idea, romantic even, that if you just care enough, work hard enough, hold on long enough, anything can be fixed. But I don't believe that anymore, because here's what I've learned. Love can survive a lot of things, but it cannot survive what it's forced to swallow in silence. My relationship didn't fall apart because of one fight. It didn't end with one cruel sentence or one moment of blame. It unraveled the way most things do, slowly, quietly, and then all at once. It started with the compromises I made without being asked, with the joy I dimmed because it made his daughter uncomfortable, with the secrets I kept to protect their dynamic, with the grace I extended while receiving none in return. And for a while, I thought that made me strong. But love doesn't thrive in imbalance. It doesn't grow in places where only one person is allowed to have needs, or voice, or pain. I kept trying to be understanding, to remind myself she was struggling, that he was overwhelmed, that blended families were hard, and this is just part of the process. But no one ever said how long I was supposed to wait, how many parts of myself I was supposed to sacrifice, how much of my dignity I was supposed to trade for a chance at harmony. And when the man I loved turned my engagement photo into a symbol of someone else's suffering, that was the moment something in me snapped. Because love can survive sadness. It can survive miscommunication. It can survive disappointment, grief, even betrayal. But it cannot survive when one person becomes the designated villain every time something goes wrong. It cannot survive when someone weaponizes your joy, when your silence is expected, when your emotions are optional and theirs are law. That's not a relationship. That's a performance. And I was tired of performing, tired of walking on eggshells, tired of protecting someone else's feelings at the cost of my own, tired of loving a man who stood behind his daughter like a shield, not to protect her, but to hide from me. Because the truth is, I wasn't asking him to choose between us. I was asking him to see me, to defend me, to correct what needed correcting, even when it came from his child, to stand beside me instead of stepping away every time the air got too thick with truth. But he couldn't do that. Or maybe he wouldn't. And that's when I knew. Love can survive many storms, but it cannot survive the absence of safety. And I had not felt safe in that relationship for a very long time. So I stopped asking what we could recover from, and started asking what I was willing to carry. The answer was simple. Not this. Not anymore. I didn't leave in anger. I didn't slam doors or write a final message hoping he'd read it and suddenly understand. I just left. Quietly. With both feet. With a mind made up and a heart that, finally, stopped begging for softness in places it had only ever been bruised. Because in the end, it wasn't about Allie. It wasn't about the pictures. It wasn't even about the sentence that broke it. It was about what I'd learned to accept, and what I finally chose not to. I thought being patient made me loving. I thought being silent made me strong. I thought enduring was the price you pay to earn your place in a family that isn't yours. But real love doesn't ask you to disappear. It doesn't reward your self-erasure with crumbs of recognition. And it doesn't twist your joy into someone else's guilt. So I walked away. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I finally started loving myself more than the version of me that relationship required. If you've ever been made to feel like your feelings are too much, like your presence is conditional, like your boundaries make you a threat instead of a partner, you're not alone. And you're not wrong for wanting more. More respect, more clarity, more peace, more than what someone's silence leaves behind. Because survival is not the same as connection. Endurance is not the same as love. And sometimes, the bravest thing you'll ever do is leave quietly after being blamed loudly. If this story found you, if it stirred something in you, stay with us. Subscribe, share your thoughts, tell your story. There's space here for voices like yours, ones that have stayed quiet too long, ones that know what it feels like to choose freedom, even when no one else claps for it. Because walking away doesn't mean you gave up. It means you finally heard yourself say, I deserve to be somewhere I'm not constantly explaining why I belong. And you listened.